Hey everybody, it's Andrew Brown, and in this video I want to share with you a learning technique that I use for learning cloud. I call it stacking. And the idea behind it is that, or at least I believe that this can be a more effective way of learning multi-cloud. I really do want to make a full course on this at some point, but I just want to kind of show it in action so that you can get an idea on how you can learn the differences quickly between cloud providers and get the concepts and leave the stuff that you don't need to know, because the challenge with certifications is that they go very deep in very specific tooling. And, there is utility in that. But the other issue is that if you only use AWS, you will not fully understand cloud concepts because every provider does it differently. They use different language. They have different functionality around them. And so you just might not be aware of that missing information or gap when you think, oh, yeah, I know serverless really well, but you haven't used the other serverless solutions, so you really don't know. In the industry, a lot of people are saying it's just too much. You can't do all of them at the same time. I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm not seeing anyone attempting to teach in a multi-cloud way. I want to teach in a multi-cloud way. I'm just stuck making certification courses because there's a lot of drive behind them. You have the major providers that are promoting them. You have the companies that are asking for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to learn. And the hardest part is when you're going out and you're looking at a job posting, they're asking for all sorts of stuff: Kubernetes, AWS, Azure, GCP. It's just a mix of stuff, right? They'll be asking for DevOps stuff like Terraform, Ansible, CI/CD, and stuff like that. And so, the thing is that you're not going to learn it all. And lots of companies are going to be like, well, this is our particular stack. And so you're going to think that you have to chase those very specific technologies. Whereas if you're just really good with CI/CDs, it doesn't matter what CI/CD they put on that list. You should just have it checkboxed off. And so the only way you can gain that is by practicing in more than one CI/CD pipeline. Now, going deep on stuff is great for practical purposes, but again, you want to make sure that you have complete knowledge on these concepts. So, hopefully that gives you an idea or confidence there. But, how would you go about that? Because again, there is no learning path. The closest thing that might come to multi-cloud learning would be GCP. And they don't really do it fully multi-cloud. They talk about the other providers, but they don't. It's not like they open the other ones and test you against them. So, I've never made any content for this format, but I've definitely, again, used it as a learning method. So maybe what I'll do here is I'll just open up 3 providers. Maybe we can even do Alibaba Cloud if my Alibaba Cloud account still works, and we can try to see what we can learn looking at all of them at the same time, okay? So just give me a second to get set up. All right, everybody. So what I've done is I've opened a few accounts. I have AWS. And sorry if it's a bit small. I'll try to bump it up. And the frame doesn't bump up, but the major area does. But we have AWS, Azure, GCP, Alibaba Cloud, and Linode. Okay, and Linode is now called Akamai Cloud Manager. For the longest time, I thought it was pronounced Akamai, which to me sounds better, but that's not how it's pronounced. It's Akamai. Maybe Akamai, I don't know. But I thought Linode was a better name, but Linode got acquired by them. And so, in terms of my knowledge of providers, and again, it's based on different services and things like that. Let's say we're talking about virtual machines, and that's what we'll look at as a comparative. But, Alibaba Cloud, have no idea how to use it, so that'll be a fun one. Linode, now known as Akamai, or I already forgot how to say it, but anyway, I'm going to call it Linode because it's easy for me to say. I remember how to do that. I used those earlier in my career, so I should be able to do it. But, the idea is to look at how the virtual machines functionally work. I'm not going to get into the lecture side of the content, but we're going to look at the functionality of it and see what we can infer. I can just tell you by logging into all these providers that Azure was the easiest. I don't know what it is, but I'm on a Windows machine and I'm just logged in forever. And, that is something that I really like, is that I don't have to hassle to get in. AWS is the biggest hassle to log into. GCP is pretty easy because my main account is a Google or Gmail account. Alibaba Cloud and Akamai were pretty darn easy. But anyway, we'll look at virtual machines. So the first thing is let's see if we can figure out where the virtual machines are. So all these providers look like they have search bars. This one has a search bar here. This one has a search bar here. So the idea is let's go locate all the virtual machines. I know they all have virtual machines. So we go to AWS. Let's type in virtual machine. Let's see what we get. And we get EC2 image builder. That is not correct. What we're looking for is EC2. So why AWS does not make it when you type in virtual machine to show you the service that the functionality you're looking for, I don't know. That is a feature issue. But what we'll do is we'll type in EC2 because I know that that's where that is, virtual servers in the cloud, right? We'll make our way over to Azure. And so I'm going to type in virtual machine. And in Azure, they name their services generally what they are. So a virtual machine in Azure is called virtual machines or Azure VM. So we'll go into that one. We'll make our way over to GCP. Right now I'm in a CRUD workspace. I don't think I ever did much with this, but notice at the top here, and this is something we might want to mention, is like the scoping of these resources. So in AWS, you are launching things into different regions, and that is where those resources are going to live. They live within an AWS account. AWS account has an organizational structure that is outside of this. You have to be in your root account to be able to organize and structure that kind of stuff. And it's very, very difficult to move resources from one account to another, like if not impossible. When we look over to Azure, you don't have this region dropdown. You select where you want to deploy resources for the most part when you create a virtual machine. So up here, we'll look at that here in a second. It has resource groups. We'll see that here in a moment. But it's interesting because, you have a lot more virtual logical grouping that you can do of your resources and flexibility to move them around. So you can really do everything. I mean, you should, but well, maybe not, but you can do everything in basically a single account because you can really isolate the scope of that stuff. Whereas AWS, it's a little bit harder. GCP has great controls in terms of logically grouping your resources. But right away, like, here, it doesn't say we're in a particular project, we're in an account. So this one is the Exam Pro training account up here. And this one, you just have level projects. So, they all kind of do the same thing, but they're all a little bit different. But anyway, what we'll do is I'll create a new project here, and we'll just say my VM, right? And we'll go ahead and create that because that's something we need to do for GCP. When we get to virtual machines, we'll look at that here in a moment. We're going to make our way over to Alibaba Cloud. Again, I don't know it very well, but as far as I've been told, it works very similarly to AWS. So let's see if that's the case. They do have the big window over here on the left-hand side. It looks like they're calling their virtual machines cloud servers. The reason I know that this is probably what that is because the number one type of compute is virtual machines. And if we're under computing, I'd imagine it's the first thing. And actually, it's not cloud servers, it's Elastic Compute Service. So that's actually the heading. So it's actually ECS, which is confusing because over at AWS, they call Elastic Container Service that, but this is their virtual machine, Elastic Compute Service. But if I was to type up virtual machines, what would I get? Virtual private cloud. So that wouldn't be particularly accurate. So we'll go over here on the left-hand side, and we're going to go over to Elastic Compute Service. Again, don't know much about Alibaba Cloud, but the point is that I know these three, so I feel like I can translate that knowledge. So we'll come over here. Says you do not have any ECS instances running. And so we have that procedure here. We'll make our way over to Akamai. So Akamai is trying to position themselves as a cloud provider. Linode was just a virtual private server, so they were just virtual machines with some additional things like a load balancer and other stuff. Akamai was, or is, they have a bunch of content delivery services and things like that. And so they've paired those with virtual machines, and now they have more of a, I would call it a light CSP or third tier CSP solution. So the reason I would call it a cloud service provider is because they have more rich functionality, but they still don't have, I think it's like pay for what you, like pay for the unit of thing that you want as opposed to metered billing. But again, I haven't been in here in a while, so they might be changing stuff here. But they call their virtual machines Linode or nodes. And I just know that because, again, I used this before I was actively using AWS. So we'll go ahead and create that. So we'll open up the create screen on all these and just give them a nice comparison. So for AWS, it's launch instance. right? For virtual machines, it's create, and you have some options. We'll hit Azure Virtual Machine. Over GCP, we didn't do this here, but let's type in virtual machine. And, again, it's not the best here, but you have a tutorial. For GCP, it's compute, cloud compute, I believe, compute engine. Yeah, compute engine, there we go. And, I've used these a lot. It's so hard to keep the name straight. Don't worry about it. Just know that you want a virtual machine and it's named something compute. And, when you're in the system, you'll figure it out as you go. And so we'll go ahead here and we'll create our instance here. We'll go over here and create the ECS instance here in Alibaba Cloud. And maybe this is where we start doing our comparison. So let's make our way over to EC2. This was redesigned as of, I don't know, last year or 6 months ago. I'm still kind of used to the old UI, but we'll take a look here. And the first option we have is to name our virtual machine. And so what I'll go ahead here is name it my web server. Now the thing is that the naming of resources, you think it'd be really simple, but different providers have different restrictions on their naming. I usually find where I feel the most restrictions is with Azure. Azure seems to really be picky about naming. And this is, again, the advantage of going across the cloud and learning all this stuff is that you learn the differences. And, in my head, the thing I remember is Azure is a pain to name things. Okay, so we'll go over here. And if we go on the left-hand side, it doesn't tell us how we can name it, but I'm going to type in my virtual machine. Okay. And there's no complaint here. What happens if I give it spaces? So it's starting to complain. Let's make our way back over to AWS. Let's try that. Can it have spaces here? So notice in AWS, you can have spaces in the name. This one is very particular. And there's not a rhyme or rhythm. Every different service in Azure seems to have its own logic. Some things have to be all lowercase, right? Some allow you to have hyphens, other ones don't let you have hyphens. It's just a mixed bag of things, and you learn that as you go. So we'll go over here and do that. We'll make our way over to GCP, and it seems really silly. We're just talking about the name, but really this stuff does change. If we go over here, it tells us straight up front the naming conventions. I don't know why, but Microsoft does not tell you until you start typing it in. But if you go over here on the right-hand side, we can see it says name must start with a lowercase letter, followed to up to 62 characters, numbers, hyphens, and cannot end with a hyphen. So you cannot do this on the end. So if I want to do my web server, it probably won't take it. Right? So it has to be lowercase. This should kind of tell you what kind of company GCP is. GCP is I feel like it's ran by developers, engineers, because if I wanted to name my resources, I want them to all be very conventional in terms of the naming. I want them to be easy to read. I don't want them to be a big mess of stuff. And so, I feel like whoever designed these services or and things like that, they have that kind of attention to detail and trying to add a layer of convention to make it easier to manage your resources. In Azure, it's a mess. In AWS, you can kind of get things to be consistent, but you really just have to give up and just accept that you can't name things in a conventional way, right? Like if you want everything to be lowercase hyphen, forget it. It's not going to work across the board. And the other reason is not that you can't input it, but like once you start getting into automation and doing CloudFormation, it's like it will auto-generate out names, and they just dump out all different kinds of casing and all different kinds of formats. So, again, Azure is the most pain to name things. AWS is okay, but you're not going to get the consistency you want. GCP, clean names, right? Which is really nice. We'll go over to Alibaba Cloud, know nothing about it. Let's go ahead and hit that create ECS instance. I rarely ever launch up Alibaba Cloud, but it's a great opportunity to learn. I think it opened in a new tab, so that's why I'm a bit confused. And we'll go here and we're looking for the name. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So I'm looking for a name. Already we have payment methods and stuff like that, but I just want to know where the name is. Is there any place to name our service? So right away, we can't even name our service. It probably comes farther down the route. Can we click into further steps? It looks like all the steps are visibly here. Where the heck's the name? So that to me is kind of interesting. Okay, we'll come back to Alibaba Cloud because it seems like there's a lot going on here. Somebody said it was like AWS. Sure doesn't look like it so far. We'll make our way over to Akamai or Linoid. And right away, I'm looking for where I can input my name for the service. And I'm not sure if I see it. We'll go down here. Where's the name? So that's okay. I mean, maybe it comes later in the process, but we can't select our name right off the bat. But somewhere I bet you can name it, okay? But this one's not too bad. It's just that the order of things are a little bit different. So, again, we'll circle back here, but we'll just keep trying to fill these things out. So the next thing is we want to choose what type of image we're using. Okay, like that's going to be the OS that we're loading onto it for the virtual machine. The namings of these things are different. Cloud services love to try to brand things like virtual machine images. AWS calls it Amazon machine image. We don't have to call it that, but that's what they call it. Yes, they do have functionality around it, but again, this is where there's different names for things, and they're just trying to put like a color or a brand on top of this stuff. And so below here, you'll see that we have a bunch of machine images. They call them AMIs for short. So if we go here, we can browse them all. It's defaulting to Amazon Linux. AWS actually maintains their own Linux variation. I believe that it was based off of CentOS. I'm not 100% sure because, I don't keep up to date to everything, but I could have recalled that Red Hat was not supporting CentOS anymore. But I know that Amazon Linux is CentOS-like. And the reason I know that is because it uses yum commands, and you can use Red Hat Linux package sources in it. And generally, if you're going to best leverage AWS, you're going to want to use Amazon Linux because a lot of the services have synergies with them by default. Now, you have to make that trade and say, is it worth the development time? Like if your team already knows Ubuntu and you're not going to be using the services and stuff like that, but you don't know, right? Because you haven't really seen the full scope of AWS services. That might be a consideration for you. I try to use Amazon Linux as much as I can. In some areas, I just say, forget it. And I just go and use Ubuntu or Debian. Okay. They have a lot of options here, but notice that it defaults to Linux first. I would describe AWS as a Linux first provider because they best run with Linux. They can run Windows servers. And I believe that their Windows servers spin up very quickly. There's some kind of trick that they do, I think that they're pre-warmed or something weird, because they're always trying to get people to use. They're trying to address the pain points that people have Windows servers on Microsoft and say like, hey, on AWS, we can spin them up faster than even Microsoft can, like things like that. But, speaking of Windows servers, the best place for Windows servers is Azure because of all of the rich functionality and migration paths for traditional companies. And that's what a lot of people, schools and hospitals and stuff like that, they're already working on working with Microsoft workloads because of the 90s and just when they got into the market and started building out their own data centers or in-house servers. And also everyone that works at their company understands that tool set, the Microsoft tool chain or tool set of all that ecosystem. And so for them, it's an easier migration over to Microsoft. That's for years why I said that Microsoft or Azure was actually was a much bigger than you thought, because it was a matter of time for all those providers to move over to cloud or to use cloud to some degree. But anyway, we have a lot of options here. So we have Linux, we can run Mac OS, which is pretty cool. All the flavors of Linux, and then we have Microsoft versions. Now, if you are big into Microsoft servers, you might care about the amount of the level of Microsoft servers. I assume that Azure probably has all of them, and AWS has a set of them. Probably not as much as Azure does, but probably pretty good. So I think you'll be in okay shape over there. But, I'm just going to go select Amazon Linux 2023. It used to be 1 and 2, and now it's 2023. I guess they're changing it. Maybe next year will be Amazon Linux X. Just stick with a naming pattern, people. But it'd be cool if they made a new one every year, but we'll see. And so we've chosen our AMI. We'll go over to Azure. And you notice here we'll have our resource group. We didn't really talk about this, but remember in Google we made a project? Well, in Azure, at the time of creating resources is when you can group your resources into things. So what I'm going to do here is just create a new resource group. I'm going to call this, actually this one's okay, so it already named it for us, my virtual machine group. And the subscription is your account. So like in AWS, you have an account. Accounts in Azure are called subscriptions. Notice in AWS, you don't select your account because you cannot, well, actually, sorry, that was misleading. I said account. Subscriptions are the method of payment, sorry. So you can have different subscription models to pay in different ways on Azure. And so you can change the way you pay, whereas in AWS, you don't have that kind of level of flexibility, right? And I think this might have to do with where the pay goes. Bako, you know Bako, he knows this a lot better than I do in terms of the payment side of it because he worked many years with Azure workloads, maintaining this stuff for schools and other things like that. And so he would understand the pay part of it. I don't. But all I need to know is that you have to select a subscription. And I kind of, in my head, I kind of make that look like an account. But really there are, what are they called? Namespaces? Tenants in Azure. So tenants are kind of the equivalent of an account, and the subscriptions is a method of payment. So Microsoft loves to decouple things and have a lot of layers. But for some organizations, that level of logical grouping stuff is really worth it. Whereas in AWS, you kind of wish you had it. In GCP, they have a way of doing it, but it's very opinionated. Okay. So anyway, coming back to here, we're looking for the image. They just call it image. Nothing crazy there. It's named exactly that. Notice that it defaults to Windows. Of course it defaults to Windows first. This is a Microsoft cloud service provider. They want you to use Windows. And the thing is, a lot of services, you might have an option to choose between Windows and Linux. Like for one example is Azure Functions, which is serverless functions. When you have the option, choose Windows. And the reason why is because you will find out that if you try to do Linux first on Azure, they'll just be like, sorry, you don't get certain functionality. And you're like, why not? Because they built everything around the Windows servers first, because it's their product. They want you to use it. They have more expertise in it. And so there are just places where Linux sucks on Azure. It just simply does. But a lot of the times it's between choosing Windows and Linux, but you don't even have to interact with the Windows server. You're just choosing the underlying OS and you never touch it. So you might as well just choose Windows. Because some people might not want to because they're saying, well, I like Linux. I want to be able to interact with it. But these are parts where you don't even interact with it. So just choose Windows in those cases. For virtual machines, of course, we directly interface with them. So that's a different story. But anyway, here we have Windows 10. You can choose, if you say see all images here, you can choose Linux. Linux is here. And that's what I'm going to do. The reason why is that, when you're learning, Windows servers tend to be more expensive because they require more overhead to run, like compute, memory, and things like that. On Azure, you have to choose a particular size. You can't choose a very low tier of compute. You have to choose a particular certain size. And so I want to help you avoid spend. But, they don't have like Microsoft Linux, I don't think. I don't think that's the thing. But we'll type it in for fun just to make sure that it's not there. I'm pretty sure there isn't. So as far as I know, I don't know of Microsoft having their own flavor of Linux. If they do, I sure don't know what it is. But what we'll do is we'll go over and just choose Ubuntu. Ubuntu or Debian. I like Debian, but we'll choose Ubuntu. And so we'll choose minimal 2204 LTS. That sounds very recent. We have Gen 1 and Gen 2 x64. I'm going to choose Gen 2. I forget the difference between Gen 1 and Gen 2. I have a lecture on it about that somewhere. I'm sure I do. But anyway, so now we've chosen our image. Notice we have the option between x64 or ARM, so some images might let you choose between them. When you can, ARM is more efficient. You should save money using ARM. It really just depends on what you're running your workload. I'm finding myself running ARM a lot more these days. If we go over here, this one's x86 64. The reason I'm choosing it is because I'm not sure if the ARM one is part of the free tier. So we go here. If we look carefully, this is x86 here. This is 64-bit ARM. So this one is ARM. Or you can choose it. So over here, I can choose ARM over there. Okay. Oh, I'm covering it on my screen. I'm going to get out of the way. Here we go. So over here, we have that 64-bit. And I might have been covering the screen the entire time without knowing it. There we go. I'm just going to make myself a little bit smaller so you can still see me as a talking head. Okay. But so now I have chosen ARM 64. And, you know, when you can, choose ARM. ARM is great. I thought at one point I would run into issues, but now I don't seem to run into any issues, so I use ARM as much as I can. Over here, let's say we wanted to choose ARM. Could we do that? I'm just going to go back to the marketplace. I'm going to go and see if we go, say, operating system. I'm going to go and unselect Windows. I don't want Windows. And I don't want CentOS. Debian's fine. I don't want Red Hat. We'll do this, okay? And we'll go here. One nice thing about Azure is they always have really great filtering options. They have a very robust UI, but it comes at a trade-off because you'll find when you're using Azure, the responsiveness or the state of the panel is misleading because it has to propagate on information. So often I find that people lack the most confidence when they're using Azure, even when they're doing the right stuff. So what I'm looking for here is ARM. So I'm trying to figure out, yeah, here we go, ARM. So I drop down ARM here. And so now we have this one here. And so we can choose Gen 2. Still says x86, but now I have the option for ARM. It says this image is not compatible with the selected security type. To keep trusted launch virtual machine, select a compatible image. And so now it's complaining about that. And I'm not 100% sure, so I'm just going to switch to x64. I don't want to get into the crazy weeds here with other functionality, but if I could, I'd choose ARM, and I'd spend a little bit more time doing that. Coming over to GCP. GCP for virtual machines is probably down here. We have, where is it? Where are you? I'm blanking out here for some reason. Maybe it's in a later step. I always kind of forget. I'm just searching Linux here. Down here. Okay, so down over here, we can go look at the boot type. I'm going to go here and change it. And so now what we can do is we can change, you know, the images that we want. And so here we have Linux, Debian, so very limited set here. But I guess the question is how, like, let's say I wanted Ubuntu. And I'm gonna be honest with you. I spend, like, in terms of providers, I spend the most time with AWS, second with Azure, third with GCP. Usually with GCP, I'm looking at services like Vertex AI, BigQuery. I'm not running my core services on there. And so that's why I'm a bit fuzzy with that. So I'm just kind of curious where we could find Ubuntu. So give me 2 seconds. Oh, it's up here. It's not even hard. It's just, I'm just expecting kind of like one drop down. And that's the problem. Like when you use these other providers, they kind of like coax you into a particular pattern. And so GCP, I mean, I think they're the most logical in terms of the way they do it, but it can throw you for a loop because, you know, some of these are more similar than others. So we'll go to Ubuntu. I didn't even know there was an Ubuntu Pro. I assume that's like a paid version. And then, so now I can choose my 2004 LTS. Notice here we have x86, we have ARM64, so we choose that. The boot disk infrastructure must be x86 64 compatible with the machine type. So again, I'm just gonna go back to the other one. It's not like we can't figure it out. I just don't want to fiddle with it here. I don't care. It might matter in terms of the storage size because each provider is going to have a virtual disk attached to it or block storage attached to it. And you know, some of those are for free tier, some of those are not. I'm not really concerned about that right now. I just want to get this running. I think 10 gigabytes is fine. But you know, just notice that the flow is much, much different. So we'll go here, we'll choose Ubuntu. License type is free. That sounds good to me. And so he's choosing our boot disk. Let's go over to Alibaba Cloud. Where would be the image type? So it says instance type. And so instance type is the size of compute, but I want to be able to choose the type of image. So down here we have images. So we have public, custom, shared, marketplace images. I'm going to assume public images are the ones that are provided by Alibaba Cloud, and marketplace images are ones that are third party. Notice like over in other providers, you're always going to the marketplace. But if we go over here and we just open it up again for comparison, yeah, they call it marketplace AMIs, so that's fair. These are so there's community AMIs, marketplace AMIs, and then the ones that are provided by the provider. AWS doesn't even say AWS here. It just we know that's provided by AWS. So I would think that this would be under the market. So AWS and third party, yeah. So if you're looking for AWSs, they put them under the marketplace, and then community one are ones that just come with, it's your risk to use them. It's like if I uploaded one and I said you could use it. Coming over to Azure, we'll just take a look at the way they organize their marketplace. So coming back over to CL Images. Okay, and coming over here, if we go to publisher type, we have Microsoft and partners. So, third parties are called partners. I'm not noticing any community ones. Okay, so maybe there aren't community ones. I'm not 100% sure. It's up here on the left-hand side, and I guess it's a preview. So sometimes in Azure, you'll see this word preview. It means that it's a feature they're thinking about adding. And so I guess Azure did not previously have community images, and they're thinking about adding that functionality. What I want to tell you about preview in Azure is that it might not actually come out. So don't use preview features if your business relies on it, right? If you find out tomorrow that they're not bringing that feature in, it's not going GA, it's not going generally available, do not use it, or make sure you have a migration path and you can spend the day or you have the time investment to move off of it, okay? It's interesting to see that they have community images coming. But yeah, you'll find that, this word preview shows up a lot. And I know some companies that have gotten screwed over using preview stuff. They were talking to Microsoft. Microsoft was engineering functionality for them. They sent a person over to them to make sure the solution worked for them. And then, they were 3-6 months into using this thing. The company really relied on it. And Microsoft said, we're not going with it now. And that company was screwed. Okay, so people complain about GCP pulling features. Microsoft does it too, but they make it your fault because you're like, well, you're using a preview, and we said we weren't 100% going to use it, even though you have a strong confidence they're going to do that. AWS rarely ever gets rid of a product. If they do it very slowly, and you don't have to really worry about it. So that's kind of the trade-off there. But yeah, with Microsoft stuff, if something's in preview for like a year or two, it might never go GA, and really that's how it is. So just be careful there with those, and try to understand how long it's been in preview, if there's even any way to look that up. Generally, I just know because I talk to Azure friends, and they say, yeah, it's been in preview for X amount of time, and that's how I know. I don't know where to Google it or Bing it to find out. Anyway, coming over to GCP, we're talking about the marketplace. So we'll go back over to the boot image. So, again, the easiest way to find it for me is I just type it in or search for a boot. Here we go. It's down below here. I don't know. I mean, logically it makes sense. It is a boot disk, but, I kind of wish that the choice of that was up there. But, Google's really good at just choosing the thing for you. So a lot of times it's like you don't need to go and fiddle with these things. You just use what they suggest. That's kind of the attitude about it. They have a marketplace up here, so explore hundreds of solutions here. So you have to click off to the side here, and then we can explore the marketplace. Okay. Why it's not in line, I do not know. And then we can go over here and where would this be? Compute platform? Compute engine? And I'm already lost. So, you kind of get the idea that, GCP really wants you to use the stuff that they have. That marketplace support is a bit confusing. I'm not going to dig for it, but you can navigate and kind of figure it out what you're looking for there. I would imagine that if you want an image for the marketplace, maybe it would come in as a custom image. I'm not 100% sure on that. I don't usually try to go at the marketplace and find stuff unless there's a reason in a tutorial. I find more reason to do that in Azure and AWS, not so much in GCP, because again, like their services are very solid, and I'm using them for very particular use cases. I'm not running my primary cloud workloads on that, so that's where my gap of knowledge is. I usually know more about their more modern service, like modern application development, like containers or functions and stuff like that. The virtual machines, traditional stuff, not my strength. But anyway, they do have a marketplace somewhere. Coming back over to Alibaba Cloud, and the reason we went down that rabbit hole was to look at these options. So public image, I'm assuming that means that they use the word public as in Alibaba's providing those images. And then you have marketplace images and community images. So those are pretty clear, but public does not necessarily mean community. It just means Alibaba Cloud. That's the way they name it. And it looks like they have their own Linux version. Hey, it's almost like they're copying AWS there. So they have their own version of Linux. That's kind of interesting. And so we can go here and we'll choose LTS64. Do they have ARM? I don't know. And I don't even know where you choose that. I would have thought I would say like ARM on here or x86 ARM, but if it's there, I sure don't see it. There's a quick start. I'm not sure what that is. Oh, and there's that trusted system option. So we go here, system trust service checks and reports the integrity of the components such as the UEFI and GRUB in the system startup chain. Okay, so this thing, this trusted system, I assume it's to ensure there's no tampering with the hardware. I think I know what that is because when I was trying to update from Windows 10 to Windows 11, I had to have some kind of security component key or something, and I didn't have it in my machine on my motherboard, so I couldn't update. So I assume this is a tampering thing. We just saw that over in Microsoft. Notice I didn't see that over in AWS. It's not to say that it's not there, but we didn't see it. And so this is where I'm talking about the value of going cross-cloud is that you see something and you go, oh, what is that? Because I didn't see it over here in AWS, because sometimes they're so good at doing stuff, it's abstracted away and you don't even know that it's happening, right? So I wouldn't even known about that. And so now I've learned what trusted system is, and I can go back to AWS and bring back that knowledge, right? Just knowing, oh, well, where is it, right? It's just there. You don't have to worry about it. They still do it. Then they have this option, security hardening. So this says load security components for free. Security components provide various security features such as site, website, backdoor detection, remote login notifications, brute force blocking. I don't know what that is. Maybe they're just installing some packages that they manage there. But yeah, that's kind of curious. So we have our image chosen. Let's go over to Linoid. For Linoid, we choose the thing we want. So much simpler. I mean, Debian is great. If you're running a server and you don't need a UI, then yeah, it's great. But let's see if they have Ubuntu. And they have 2304, which is quite new. Notice everyone's doing 2004 LTS. It's probably has something to do with it being stable, right? So some of these will only run stable and you can't run, they're not going to give you that option. Like I don't think we saw 2304 here in AWS. We'll go back and take a look here. I mean, we were choosing Amazon Linux, but let's go take a look here at Ubuntu and just kind of see what our options are. And there could be reasons as to why. So this is 2204. Does it have 2304? No. Does Azure have 2304? And I want to go back here. This is 2204, so let's say CL Images. 2304. It does, cool. Does GCP have it? And notice every time I go back here, I'm building the knowledge in terms of where these things are. So this one says 2004. We did have 22, and there's 23 right here. I don't know why it's defaulting to 2004. There could be a reason for it. I'm going to go over and probably because I feel like this one's the most stable, I'm going to check to 2204. I'm actually kind of curious. We're going to go over to Ubuntu and take a look at what the current version is. So it says here, latest release 2304, and then 2204. And so I imagine is the most recent release, and the current long-term support is 2204. And so it seems like this came out in April 2023. That's pretty recent. So, it's up to you what you'd want to use. I think probably we want to use 2304, to be honest, because that's the most recent. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to choose Gen 2 instead. Actually, what was the difference? There was two options there. CL Images, Ubuntu. We have These look identical to me. x86, x86. What is the difference? I don't know, but I'll choose this one here. Okay, I'm gonna make my way back over here. I don't want to change out to Amazon Linux. I'd rather use that. Alibaba Cloud is fine. We'll keep with their version. But yeah, over here we can go and we'll choose 2304. So I guess they more or less all have 2304. So I wasn't 100% sure about that, but you know, sometimes there are variations in terms of what they have, and you have to look. And when you start regularly using something, you figure out what the differences are. So we have that selected there, and we're in good shape. Let's go and make our way back to the front here. I know we selected this like 100 times. I'll choose this one more time. Select for this. There we go. And so what is our next option? We do not need to choose region. The region is going to be North Virginia, right? If we don't want to launch in North Virginia, we have to choose first and then do that. I almost have a feeling that AWS will change that at some point, because I think that's been a pain point for them for years, but it's a huge uplift for them to do that. So maybe 2024 regions will be gone. You can just select them in place. Don't know, but that's how it is right now. Over at Azure, you choose your region, and you know, so like this one here is in North Virginia. So let's use these ones. So they have 1, 2. So they have 2 there. We'll go over here. Notice the defaults here. I think the way Azure works is that every time you come here, it's just going to randomize it. At least that's the way it feels like to me, because I come back here and it's never the same one every time. So if I was to refresh this page, I don't know if it would remember. We'll just reload this here. Would it select the same region? Okay, seems the same. I'm going to go back out here. I'm just going to click on virtual machines again, create a new one. Okay, I swear to you, some services, they're not always the same. This one's defaulting. I am in Canada East, so that is the best choice here, but they don't always do that. My Azure VM here. Okay, my virtual machine. So, you know, just be aware of that. And I'm going to choose US East here to kind of match it there. Notice below here I have availability zones I have to choose in AWS. If we go under networking, just trying to think here, it would be under networking. Again, they changed this UI on me recently, but if I go into here, the way we choose our virtual machine is based on what subnet we're launching into, because AWS, they will have, for every subnet, like for the default VPC, they'll have a availability zone to each of those subnets, right? So you don't choose AZ, you choose your subnet, and that will determine what availability zone you're in. I can choose 1A here. Doesn't really matter, it's just for demonstration, but we come over here and notice that we have a few different things here. We have availability zone, scale set, availability set. So here you can choose your availability zone. This is very similar to, does it become a set if we check box multiple ones here? But anyway, a zone is similar to AWS's, but then just name them 1, 2, 3, and AWS names them A, B, C, D. Sometimes AWS skips over one. I think in like Montreal, Canada, they have, I think C is missing. One of them is missing. And I always say, like, what happened to that that availability zone? What happened to those data centers? Like, why did it skip over a letter? I don't know. But just coming back here, we have availability zones, scale sets, and availability sets. Sets are across multiple fault domains. And then this one has scale sets. Scale sets is for automatic scaling. So this one's a bit misleading because this is automatic scaling, and AWS introduces that somewhere else here where you put it into an auto scaling group. But the thing with sets is that you don't have availability sets anywhere else. At least I don't think you do. I know AWS doesn't let you set sets. Give me 2 seconds to look it up, okay? All right, so I remember now. So the way availability sets work is that you're basically setting a, you're assigning maybe the update domain or fault domain. So the idea is that when you have servers or a server running somewhere, you want to have somewhere where it can fault over to, whether it's an update or a fault. So the idea is that in your data center, you might have different domains and fault domains and different update domains. And so the idea is that this is just a way for you to mitigate risk. In AWS, you don't choose those options. You can't set those because they already take care of it for you automatically. And so you might think, well, is it better that I have the ability to choose that? No, it's just the way that Azure's infrastructure is built out. You have to manually choose, whereas AWS makes that decision for you. Over in GCP, let's go take a look here. I don't think you have to worry about that kind of stuff at all. Networking's under here. So yeah, you don't have to worry about it here as well. And so, that's just where I find Azure's networking is a bit more complex because there's a lot more moving parts that you just don't have in other providers. Okay. But anyway, so that is that there. Coming over to GCP, we choose our region up here. So US East would be South Carolina. They don't have, oh, there's North Carolina, US East 4. And then we can choose our zone, more similarly named like AWS is. So that is interesting there. Okay. Coming over to Alibaba Cloud. Like it says random. I think if you weren't to choose one at AWS, I think it would choose at random, or it would at least set it by default. But this is interesting because we have no idea what it's going to be. The naming here is very interesting. Where's A? Why is B on the end? I mean, it doesn't matter, but it's interesting that it's all over the place. If you don't know, Alibaba Cloud is a company in China, so it makes sense that they are defaulting over here. But let's see what we have over here in North America, if anything in North America. So we do have US Virginia. Notice that there's a huge limitation in terms of availability, in terms of areas, whereas AWS has a lot more stuff, like more better distribution of stuff. Same with Azure, same with GCP. But we get a lot of locations within China, which is like nothing in everywhere else, as you could only imagine. But now we have zones A and B. I'm going to just choose zone A. Doesn't really matter. And so that is pretty clear cut in terms of how that works. We'll go over to Linoid. Linoid, we just choose, much simpler stuff. So, when I say that Linoid or Akamai is a third tier or light tier provider, you really get that sense of it's very simple. That could meet your use cases. A lot of people think that they have to go and use the most complex solution. They definitely do not. As long as it meets your requirements for your project. But anyway, so we have that. That's our only option. I don't think we choose availability zones or anything else in here. It's as simple as that. We're going to make our way back over to AWS. What would be the next logical option that we would set? The instance type. This is the type of compute that you are choosing. It's like not the OS, but like how much memory, how much like how much virtual CPU and things like that. And so in AWS, they chunk them based on names. So they all do this pretty much, but AWS has particular free tiers. They tell you over here, T2 micro, T3 micro. And if we go and compare the instances here, just get more information, generally they double in size as far as I remember. So if you go from nano to micro, usually you'll see some kind of doubling effect here. So 0.5 to 1, 2, 4, 8. Notice it goes from large to 2 times large. So actually it's over here, 16 to 32. But the rule doesn't always hold true. And they also have like just a bunch of different types based on what you want. So some machines are better at memory. Some machines are better at compute. Some machines, it's about network performance. So that's another factor that you have to consider. That might matter to you. Throughput of data into the virtual machine based on what's attached to the compute instance. So I'm going to go with Nano because I'm not on a free tier anymore. So I just want the cheapest cost. So I'll select that instance type. Some OSs might restrict based on what you have. I don't know if AWS does that. I don't think I've ever seen it say like you can't choose this in virtual machines. In different services, like when you're using SageMaker, you have a limited range of instance types. But when virtual machine, they don't know the scope of the job. So if you choose something that doesn't make any sense, I don't think they're going to stop you from doing that. Azure definitely will for Windows machines. But we'll go down here and yeah, I guess we have I thought we were going to go with Linux. I'm going to flip that over to Linux, sorry. And we'll make our way over here and take a look here and just choose Gen 2. This has 3 options. I have no idea what's going on here, but whatever, we have it selected. I'm going to go with ARM. Oh, forget it. We'll go with x64. I think they were talking about like the trusted security stuff, the security type. Trusted launch virtual machine, select a compatible image, otherwise change your security back to standard. Oh, up here. So here you could choose standard or trusted launch or confidential virtual machine. I didn't realize the option was here. So I guess if you want to use ARM, you don't have that guarantee of that security check that we saw when we were reading about Alibaba Cloud. But we were like taking a look at the instance type. So here the instance type is... here they call it size, right? So size, instance type, similar. I think GCP's naming is more confusing, to be honest, but I mean they follow similar to AWS, where you know AWS will name theirs based on certain categories. So I didn't mean to go there. I wanted to go back to the instance type. Sorry, the instance type here. Yeah, so they're based on, like, they have similar name stuff, but I don't know. I find it easier to remember these values as opposed to Azure's, but Azure like lets you drop them down, so it's easier to find out what you're looking for. But AWS T is their general purpose ones, and Azure's, I believe, are the B series, ideal for workloads that do not need continuous full CPU performance. So I'll expand the B series. But where I find it confusing is what is the lowest cost one? Because AWS names them like nano, micro stuff. These aren't named like that. They're B2S, B1S, BS2MS. And so you have to look at the numbers and look at the pricing. If you go over here, I like how they calculate the pricing here right away for you. So this one says $9.72 if I was to run it continuously for all day long. It says 1 vCPUs, 1 RAM, 2 gigabytes data. I'm pretty sure there's something smaller than that, because I know I've ran smaller ones than this. There has to be. Let me just go here. 4th generation. Are these cheaper? No. Where are they? And so, you know, I can go here. There used to be a way to filter based on cost. No grouping, so we kick the grouping out, which is nice. It takes a bit of time because it's doing this in place. I think I might have upset Azure here. There we go. And so now what I can do is I can just filter based on cost. Okay, that's the most expensive. We're not going to run a DC8. And so it's the B1 LS. And what's weird is I didn't notice it in that listing, so maybe I missed it. But this is 0.5. That's the cheapest one. So, you know, with Azure, you need to be a little bit more careful when you select this. Make sure you're looking at the cost and read what type it is. But there's my equivalent for that one. Again, if we're running Windows, it would not let us run it this cheap. So that's that over there. Coming over to Compute Engine. Here they are. I believe that GCP has much fewer than other ones. And so that's either good or bad in your opinion. I kind of like that it's limited because we have a lot of options in other places. But this is just the nature of GCP. They are really more, they have fewer options, but everything is really, really good. So you might think, well, maybe they feel like a light tier provider like Acme, but I'm just going to tell you that their stuff is just better fine-tuned, and it's just, I don't know. I just find that it's easier to work with. So we have all of our types. The lowest cost one, I believe, is E2 series. And so, you know, you can read it and get an idea there. And so we have E2, but notice over the top, we can kind of filter and just have a better idea of what we're looking at here. But we're going to go back to general purpose. But notice that we choose the series, or everyone calls them different. So like maybe they're called families or categories, but you choose your machine type, the family, the series that you want, and then you choose your sizing. Okay. Why does GCP do it that way? I don't know. They just like to do it slightly different. You know, GCP does things differently. So here we have our different types. So I'm looking for the smallest. So I'm going to go for the micro, which is our smallest one here. It's even smaller than the other ones. I don't know if you can go that small. Maybe with AWS you can. It says 0.5 ARM. We go over to GCP. 0.25 to 2 VPCs. Okay, so it's in a range. All right, so we have our machine type chosen here. Yeah, I don't know what to do with those. Let's leave those alone, but you have an idea of what those are. We'll make our way over to Alibaba Cloud. We'll take a look at what we have over here. A lot of filtering options. I think we have, did we choose ARM or x86? We chose our OS type right down here. Oh, we choose their Linux version, right? So we just choose that. We'll go here. I'm going to assume this is x86. I'm going to assume it's not ARM. And so here we have our sizes. Can we filter our pricing? And the cheapest one per month we can get is $40. That is not cheap at all. So I don't know if it's because we are running it in North America. What happens if we go over to China? Let's go back there and take a look there. It could just be because of that. I don't know. Or there could be other reasons why. And it's still pretty darn expensive. So we'll make our way back over to North Virginia. And it looks like the cheapest one we can run is this general purpose type. It's not that great. I guess you can't go smaller than that. There are providers like IBM Cloud where, and I don't like IBM Cloud. I like their UI is really nice, but I find just trying to get into their system is such a pain. And they start at very, very high tiers. Like they're for enterprise. They're not for small companies. And so this is the only time I've seen where the prices started really high. They might have a freer trial area, but once you have to pay, it's just like it's very steep. So it's interesting to see that this one starts at $50. That's still not that bad. Might be hard for you if you're a learner, but I'm just saying I've seen worse. And so we have our IBM Cloud one chosen there. Okay, so that is now chosen. We'll make our way over to Linoid. For Linoid, the pricing is very straightforward. I want to have the cheapest cost. Notice I say dedicated shared CPU. This is because actually, I don't know why they default to dedicated CPU, but you know, when you are utilizing CPU with all the ones we've been choosing so far, those have all been shared CPU. You probably didn't notice that, but we didn't choose like dedicated. So this means that there are other customers using the same machine, underlying machine, and we're virtually isolated in different virtual machines, okay? And so if you want a cheaper cost here, we go here, and that's their cheapest one. And I think it's at a fixed cost. I don't believe they have, well, I think they do bill per hour, but it's not lower like the other ones. I know other ones bill like per minute or per second and stuff like that. I think per minute for AWS. But what we'll do is we'll make our way back over here, because what I'm interested in is this dedicated component. So if you wanted dedicated, where would you choose that? So this would be, I knew where it was in the older interface, and now I don't know because they changed it. I really do not like this new UI, and I know they're changing the UI probably in a year, but it's probably under advanced details. So I'm just looking here under advanced details. Tenancy, so tenancy. So here it's shared, that's what we're using by default, or dedicated. So if we choose dedicated, it's a lot more expensive. Shared is what we're on. So, you know, people don't realize that they're on shared, right? So that's the option there. Coming over to Azure. I'm trying to remember where that would be. So for Azure, and by the way, we can click ahead here and I think it'll let us do that. Yeah, here it wants us to generate a new key. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to use an existing one if I have one. I don't. My key, okay. I don't care what this is called. But this one would be under what? Advanced? So it's not capacity reservations. That's whether, that's like you reserving to have something if it's not there. Azure Dedicated Host allows you to provision and manage physical servers within our data centers that are dedicated to your servers. So you would have to first create a host group and do a bunch of other stuff. You can't just checkbox a thing in Azure and have a dedicated machine. So, that process is a bit different there, but they have it and you have to kind of read and figure it out. But, again, I'm hoping that you're kind of starting to click and saying, okay, how do I find this thing here? And they all have comparable features. Some of them hide them, some of them default them, some of them call them differently. And that's how you're getting complete knowledge, because I know that it exists. I just have to kind of hunt it down. Coming over to GCP. So where would dedicated be in GCP? That's a good question. Where are you? Dedicated. Description, deletion protection, automation. Sole tenancy. So down here, sole tenancy, right? And, I'm just inferring based on the word. The word tenancy or tenant indicates how many customers are on a machine. That's why when I saw sole tenancy, I understood what it was. Selected machine type is not compatible with sole tenancy. So there are particular machine types that you have to choose in order to be able to use it. I don't know what we'd have to choose for it. I'm not really worried about it. I'm not going to go back and change it for this. But, there is a minimum to which you have to choose in order to do it. I don't know if AWS would let you run maybe they would, but could you run a T4 Nano as a dedicated? That seems really silly. I don't imagine they have a teeny tiny computer you're using that's dedicated. That'd be funny if they did, like if they went on like Temu or Alibaba Express and bought like a tiny computer and that's what it ran on. That'd be funny. But yeah, so there are options down there and you're learning the language. So Azure calls it host, right? But you search for those keywords: tenant, host, dedicated, trying to find it in their UI to figure out what it is. Coming over to here, did we see this anywhere? Because over here we have networking, system configurations, grouping. I think we have to proceed forward here. So yeah, it's probably another step. We'll take a look at it later, okay? We probably want trusted system. I don't know if that costs extra money. We'll put that on there. For this, yeah, dedicated. That's why we went down the rabbit hole here. But, I think this is Linode or Acme trying to say like, hey, we have really good dedicated servers and they're cheap. And virtual private servers, that's their original business, was dedicated servers. And then they did virtualization. But traditionally, Linode has always promoted them as like, we're really good for dedicated servers, right? So that's that option there. Let's make our way back over here. We have a key pair. Key pair is only for Linux when you're trying to log into a machine. I have some here. I don't care what it is, but that's if we want to log into that virtual machine. We have our networking options. We did a little bit of that when we were choosing where we wanted to launch our resource, but here AWS lets you choose the VPC you're launching it in. That's your virtual private cloud. It comes with a default one. Okay, and you can create your own. And then you can create your own subnets to determine availability zones, the IP addresses, stuff like that. Here it's auto-assigning the IP address. Coming over to Azure, we have a networking tab, and this is where we can, on the fly, create a virtual network. VPC in AWS is the same thing as a virtual machine, a VNet in Azure. Why they name it differently, I don't know. GCP names it VPC to make our lives super easier, but these are all virtual networks, okay? In Azure, it's a little bit harder to set up your subnets because you have to set up IP address ranges first, whereas in AWS, you don't do that. You just create a subnet, but in Azure, they make it a separate configuration. Good or bad, I don't know, but they do that. Again, that's why I say Azure has the most complexity in terms of their networking, and not all cases is it actually a good thing. It's just that it's just complex. So there are those options there. Notice that we can determine if we want to set a public IP there as well. Coming over to GCP, their networking options are interesting. There's a concept called networking tags in GCP. It's how you can group resources together. I don't like it. I really don't like it. I think that's one of the over-engineered parts in GCP is tagging and networking tags, which are, I believe, two separate things. But what VPC would this launch into? Let's just go down here. And I've done this so many times, and I seriously can't remember because it's just confusing. But that's just like the very few things that I just don't like about GCP. But I don't know what VPC this is launching into. So yeah, and the other thing about VPCs is that in GCP, or sorry, in AWS, you want to use the default VPC, like they recommend it, and then over at GCP they tell you to delete it. You don't want to use it, so it's making me question whether there is one. And also another thing I noticed is that I'm in the wrong project. Okay, I'm in the wrong project. This is a nitpick with GCP, but you have to be really careful that it doesn't throw you in the wrong place. So I thought I was in my app. I just noticed I'm in the wrong area. I'm clicking over here. Now I'm creating the thing where I want to go. I want to go over here and just see VPCs here for a second. Right, so you have your VPCs over here. You can create them. Where you select that in EC2, I don't know, but we have the default one there. But they recommend not to use this one. I don't know if you can delete it, but yeah, you can delete this VPC network. So some people come here, they'll delete this one right away. I personally don't care. I'm not that worried about it, but there's a reason why, and I just can't remember why. But again, that's the thing that you want to remember, like what is good practice? Even if you can't remember why, just like, just knowing that that's the case. Again, I'll go back over to compute. And now this time, I'm going to hope that I'm in the right project, and that's where we can make a mistake. That's GCP's problem. But with AWS, the biggest problem is you forget what region you're in. In Azure, they might change the region on you. So those are the issues that you are fighting with here. But I'm going to go back here and choose North Virginia. I'm going to go back and choose the zone. I'm going to say my virtual machine at my VM. I'll choose EC2. Notice I'm building knowledge. I'm going back. I'm having to do it again and again and again. I don't want EC2 medium. I want the smallest one. I'm remembering now that over here is where I want to change my image. We choose Ubuntu. Right? We're going to go over and choose our version 2304. Okay, over here, we will select it. The other part was, we chose that size. That's all good. Networking. Assign network tags to apply firewalls to specific VM instances. But how do we switch the VPC? Give me 2 seconds, okay? All right, so I didn't really get much there, but the one thing that I noticed was the network interface. So maybe it's the network interface that actually chooses where, there it is. Okay, so when you have a compute, like a compute, there's other components attached to it. You have this storage, and you have the network interface card, a NIC. Type in network interface card, right? So we go here, network interface card, right? It's virtual, but the idea, like, it just gave me a visual. It's like the thing you plug the internet into. And this thing is configured to, to tell where the thing is. And so when you want to change the VPC in GCP, you're actually mucking with the network interface card, which actually is technically true. That's what you're doing. But, from a user standpoint, that's not the way you change it here. You just go over and you just say on the basic, I want to use this VNet, right? This VNet, and over in AWS, you just say that there. But these do generate NICs out. So like somewhere here in AWS, you can see the NIC and it also attach additional ones if you need to. But they all have to go into the same virtual machine. Advanced network configuration. Here's network interface card. So here's our network interface card. Under networking here, does it show the NIC anywhere? No, it looks like it's abstracted away, but it does get created. And so, it's just that mental model, thinking about like, what is the thing that actually is providing the internet? And so here, they're deliberately saying the VPC is really based on the network interface card, because that's how it's going to interface with the network. And so that logically makes sense. And so, that's just the way that, Google engineers think about the way they design their UI and the way they want you to think about their resources. And, when you're using Azure or GCP, you're not getting that mental model the way they're doing it. But I'm so used to using these two that from in there, I'm like, oh, right, yeah, okay. Like as soon as I saw this, I'm like, this makes sense. This is logically making sense to me as to why they put it here. But why these other ones put it there, it's just for convenience, right? So if we had other VPCs in here, we could switch them out. I don't know why it doesn't say VPC, it just says network. And we have our sub network, so I guess our subnet, I suppose. And we have our additional options, so that's where it is. We're going to make our way over to Alibaba Cloud, and networking is the next step. So there is storage stuff here. This is fine. You know, this is choosing, I don't know what the heck AutoPL is, but we have 2 types of drives here of a particular size. Notice it says capacity is 40. I'm going to go to 20 just because I'm used to using AWS at 20, and that's their free tier. I don't know what it costs on Alibaba Cloud. I have no idea. I don't want to have spend I don't want. Here you choose your IOPS. You only have one option, so that's the IOPS I get. Is 50,000 IOPS good or bad? I don't know. I can't remember IOPS. You can attach additional disks, but we'll come back to that. You can encrypt it here. Notice you can checkbox it at this point and then attach a key from KMS, which is named the same as AWS. Some of them do it by default, right? Or at least I think they do. We'll go next because I just want to get to the next one here. I don't want to do disk encryption. Is required. I don't want it. I don't want it. I'm turning it off. I said no. Maybe it wants this for that reason. Here, I'll go next. No payment method is specified in your account. Oh, come on. I do have, you know why? It's because we updated our credit card. So forget it, Alibaba Cloud. We're not coming back to you. Okay? Maybe just give me a second, okay? Yeah, I was going to go bug Baco, but I just don't care. I'm not going to go do that. But anyway, coming back over to here, yeah, we have our NIC. And so, you know, there's different storage for different stuff. I think we can see the storage block here as well. The somewhere here, the volume, the storage. Okay, so here it says 8 GP3, so that's the lowest one. Again, I know that it's 30 now. It used to be 20, but 30 is the free tier. So this is still pretty darn small. You have different types that you can specify. Noticing that it's keeping it really simple. I'm not choosing IOPS at this level. Maybe on other ones I might choose the IOPS option, or maybe I'd have to create them in isolate. Maybe you have to go to advanced to do that. Yeah, so now I'm choosing IOPS. Notice this was at 3,000, and Alibaba Cloud had 50,000. We'll go over to Azure here. We'll go to disks. They have them pretty isolated here in the steps. This one's set to premium SSD. You have standard SSD. I think for the most part, you want to have premium when you're in production, but when we're doing what we're doing, we're going to choose standard. Notice AWS defaulted it on standard and didn't go to their premium one right away, or it could have been just the options of choosing how much stuff you have. There's a lot of logic around disks in Azure that AWS keeps it really simple. Azure makes it super complicated, but you know, I think that's the nature of the history of you know, Microsoft working, like being the primary workhorse for all these companies in the 90s, and they just need to have a lot more options here for like these servers that run your business, not these workloads, these cloud workloads to run web apps or services, but to run the operations of your business. And so there's all these interesting options here that you don't see in AWS. Maybe AWS doesn't need them, I don't know, but I'm just going to tell you there's more complexity there, and that's really interesting. Over on GCP, it's just disks, right? I imagine it has to have it has to have at least one disk attached to it, but I guess these are additional disks that are going to be attached. But we'll go ahead and, I mean, is there anything else to look at here? We can spend a lot of time in the weeds. Again, I'm just trying to show you this as a means to learn multi-cloud. If I was doing this for real and not just showing you this as a method to learn, I would be prepping lecture content in front of you of all these options. So before we jump into it, it's more clear. But there's other stuff. There's like, how do permissions get applied? How do you load data into the application? What does it look like to start up the application? And you learn a lot of stuff doing this. And this is the way I learn cloud really fast. I don't remember all the options, but I remember one thing from one other one, and then I can bring it over, and I can generally remember that it either kind of had it or it didn't have it, right? And I have a lot of confidence around it because I've been through all the UIs. So sure, I'm stumbling through these UIs, but I'm getting to the end of them, no problem. I'm not like totally out of it, right? So, you know, and I know how each of these platforms, all the kinks to all these platforms are. And that is the real value of cloud knowledge that you want to carry forward. And when you're going on job interviews, say, Yeah, I use all these ones and I can get through them no problem. I don't remember all the options, but I can do that. And I think that's the real value. So hopefully you might have picked up something there or discovered something there, but I wish I could teach cloud this way, but it'd have to be a lot more organized. At least that's what I think. But anyway, we'll see you in the next one, okay? Ciao.